Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of Living Islam in America. I'm your host, Imam Johari Abdul Malik, and on today's program we'll talk about American Muslims serving in the armed forces, the proud, the brave, and the faithful, taking the oath of office to serve and defend, fighting to uphold human rights and freedom. Muslims in the military, serving the armed forces, truly be faithful to God and country. All that and more coming up on this episode of Living Islam in America. Hours after a gunman killed 13 and wounded 30 at the U.S. Army base in Fort Hood, Texas on November the 5th, 2009, the news media was scrambling to put together the information about what had happened. Could it be a mass murder? But when the identity of the name of the shooter came forward, NIDAL, Malik HASAN, an Army major, when that information got out, the word became terrorism. That was the subject of the discussion, and some of the news outlets once again played into America's fears about the enemy within. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters' declaration, "This is an Islamic terrorist act." That challenge went unchecked on Fox News, on O'Reilly's Factor. Was terrorism at the bottom of this? Can American Muslims serving in the armed forces be trusted? What will we do today in our show to explore this and other questions, to set the record straight right now? Imam Mahdi Bray, our guest, a longtime civil rights and human rights activist, currently serving as the executive director for the Muslim American Society Freedom Foundation, and Salim Abdul Mateen, who is the U.S. Army Navy retired commander and is head of the Muslim American Veterans and is on the board of trustees of Masjid Muhammad here in Washington, D.C. I want to welcome you two brothers and gentlemen to our show and thank you for your participation.
Thank you for having us.
Let's get into it. Where were you when that news came out about the shooting at Fort Hood?
Lately, I've been at the masjid. I believe I was there, so I didn't even get it until I left. I got home about 10 o'clock that night, and I believe CARE was denouncing the situation.
Mahdi, what about you?
I was in an airport in New York flying to Washington, D.C. when I saw it flashed across the screen at in LaGuardia, actually.
How did you feel when you saw that?
Well,
first reactions.
First reaction was just a big kind of retching feeling in my gut. That this terrible event had happened, and although I constantly try to say that I'm not responsible for everything that Muslims do, any more than when we see the situation in terms of the African American community used to say credit to your race or whatever, but even though I psychologically I trained myself and something like that, I was saying to myself, oh my God, this is awful because not only of what happened, but also it's awful because a Muslim has been identified as being the culprit of this dastardly deed.
When I first heard it, much like Imam Bray, I began to wonder what would be the consequence, but more importantly, what would be the media take on the whole thing. That was my initial reaction.
Because I'm sitting here and there are three dimensions of this response. The first one is when you look on the television and say, as an American, that this happened in America. This could have happened to anybody. That oh my God, 9/11 all over again. And then you had the second piece, which is, as a Muslim, you say, somebody from my own group, and what's going to be the backlash, whether it's media or otherwise.
And initially, Johari, they weren't identifying who did it. So that for me there was that apprehension.
Yeah.
And and I have to be quite candid. I was going, I know it's a horrible thing, but I was just saying to myself, oh, I hope it's not a Muslim. I mean, I was saying that because they had not identified the shooter. But before I got on the plane, the shooter was identified, and that's when that
Yeah,
gut
that's
feeling
when it
that that I had actually, and it came forth.
But now, I was listening to the news like the rest of you. One reporter said, crazy Muslim terrorist. Can we deconstruct that? Crazy Muslim terrorist.
Well, I think the thing that one has to look at is that putting this in context. First of all,
is it terrorism? That's my question.
Well, terrorism, it depends, because we've actually used this word so loosely now. I mean, it's a catch buzz phrase for any and everything, and it certainly has been unfairly, kind of stuck upon the Muslim community in terms of dealing with that issue. Again, but there is a legal definition for terrorism.
What's the definition?
The legal definition for terrorism, and this is from the government. This is not only from the government, but also from a distinguished law professor, who at George Washington University, who says that the legal definition for terrorism is an act of violence that is used against a society or a government in order to compel a certain, or to project, or to curry a certain objective in a political situation in terms of political objectives or activities or things of that nature. So that's the definition, the legal definition for terrorism.
We're going to back up again. So what's required in this context is to say, if it is sponsored terrorism, either an individual or an organization that has a political agenda.
Sure. It has a political agenda, and it is used to coerce, if you will, through its violence. It's used to coerce the recipient of the action to be able to coerce them towards a certain goal or certain activity. But again, the nexus here and the key word here is that it is an activity that is used for coercion around the whole concept of political.
All right, but this guy is a serviceman.
Yes, sir.
Served. You know how long he was in? He's a major.
I'm not sure, but he's a major, which means he's been in 5, 6, maybe more years, 10 years.
So, what do you think is going on? You're following it. What's the reaction of Muslims in the military, or the military in general?
The first thing that comes to my mind, and I guess knowledge now that we have a little lady, he's a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
He's dealing with, as we were talking earlier, war and victims of war. What is this playing, how is this playing through his mind?
So crazy Muslim terrorist. We got something mental is going on with him. It has a potential backlash in the community, the media, how it responds to us. And maybe it doesn't fit the definition of terrorism. I don't know how it's going to play out. We'll have to wait and see. But I think that's all we have time for today. Brothers, I appreciate you being with us. And we're going to pick this back up.